The Vorak were monsters in every sense of the word, and the galaxy knew this truth like it knew the cold emptiness between stars. They stood 7 feet tall when they walked on their 6 powerful legs, their bodies covered in scales as black as the void itself, and their jaws held teeth that could tear through metal like paper. The Krithan Empire had spent 10,000 years breeding these creatures for one purpose, and one purpose alone: to kill, to destroy, to bring terror to any world that dared to resist their conquest. Every species in the 12 star systems had learned to fear the Vorak. When Krithan warships appeared in orbit, the ground forces that followed always brought these beasts with them, and no army had ever stood against a Vorak pack and survived. They felt no mercy, showed no hesitation, and they bonded only with their Krithan handlers through special implants that controlled their violent minds. Cal-9 was born in a breeding facility on the frozen moon of Krithx Prime, one of 40 pups in his litter. From the moment he opened his 4 amber eyes, the handlers knew something was wrong with him. He was smaller than his brothers and sisters, his legs not quite as thick, his scales not quite as dark. But the worst defect was his voice, when he tried to produce the terrifying war cry that made enemies freeze in fear. It came out broken and crackling, more like a dying scream than a battle roar. The handlers marked him as defective, but kept him alive because resources were precious and even flawed. Vorak could serve some purpose. They trained him alongside the others, beating him when he failed, starving him when he showed weakness, teaching him that the universe was nothing but pain and obedience. He learned to fight, learned to kill, learned to follow commands, but he was never good enough, never fast enough, never fierce enough. His littermates went to war and earned glory for their handlers. Cal-9 was assigned to guard duty, then to patrol duty, then to nothing at all. He became an embarrassment, a reminder that even the perfect breeding program could produce failures. The handlers stopped feeding him regularly, stopped maintaining his health, stopped caring whether he lived or died. When the Krithan Empire lost a major battle against the Confederacy of Free Worlds, resources became scarce across all their territories. High Commander Thirak ordered all non-essential assets to be eliminated, and Cal-9 found his designation on that list. But the handlers did not want to waste ammunition on a worthless beast, so they devised a crueler fate. Frontier Station Sigma-7 was a human outpost that had been abandoned for years, a derelict structure floating in the darkness at the edge of colonized space. The humans had left automated defense systems behind traps designed to catch pirates and scavengers. The Krithan handlers flew Cal-9 to this forgotten place and released him into its corridors without food, without water, without any hope of survival. "Let the human machines do our work for us," one handler laughed as they sealed the airlock behind him. "The defect will be dead within a day." Cal-9 wandered the dark hallways alone, his 4 eyes adjusting to the dim emergency lighting that still flickered in some sections. He had never been alone before. There had always been handlers shouting commands, always been other Voraks snarling nearby, always been the constant noise of the breeding facility. This silence was something new, something that made his twin hearts beat faster with an emotion he did not understand. He searched for food and found nothing. He searched for water and found only empty containers. His stomach ached with hunger, and his throat burned with thirst. And for the first time in his life, he felt something beyond rage and obedience. He felt afraid. On the second day, he found the trap. It was hidden beneath a floor panel, a mechanical device designed to catch anything that stepped on it. Cal-9 was weak from hunger and did not see the danger until it was too late. Metal jaws snapped shut around 2 of his legs with a sound like thunder, and he screamed his broken war cry as pain exploded through his body. He thrashed and fought against the trap, but every movement only drove the metal teeth deeper into his flesh. Blue blood, the luminescent ichor that flowed through all Vorak. Veins poured onto the cold floor and spread in glowing pools around him. He bit at the metal until his teeth cracked, clawed at the floor until his talons broke, but nothing could free him from this agony. Hours passed, and Cal-9 grew weaker. His struggles became feeble, his breathing became shallow, and the light in his 4 amber eyes began to dim. He had been bred to be a weapon of war, designed to bring death to countless enemies, and now he would die alone in a forgotten corridor, killed by a simple mechanical trap. No one would mourn him. No one would remember him. He was just a defective product, a failed experiment, a creature that the universe had deemed unworthy of existence. As darkness crept into the edges of his vision, Cal-9 did something he had never done before. He stopped fighting. He let his massive head rest on the cold metal floor and closed his eyes, accepting that this was the end. The pain was still there, burning through his shattered legs, but it seemed distant now, like it belonged to someone else. He thought about his life, the beatings, the hunger, the constant failure, and wondered if there had ever been a moment of happiness in all his years. He could not remember one. Every memory was filled with pain and fear, and the cruel laughter of handlers who saw him as nothing more than a broken tool. Perhaps death would be better than this existence. Perhaps the void would be kinder than the life he had known. The last thing Cal-9 heard before unconsciousness claimed him was the sound of footsteps, soft, hesitant footsteps approaching through the darkness. But he was too far gone to care, too weak to even open his eyes. Whatever was coming, it did not matter anymore. He had already surrendered to the end. Dr. Elena Vasquez had not planned to spend her career on a dying space station at the edge of nowhere. She was a xenobiologist, a scientist who had dedicated 15 years to studying alien life forms across the galaxy. She had published papers that changed how humanity understood extraterrestrial ecosystems, had received awards from the most prestigious universities on Earth, and had dreamed of leading her own research expedition to uncharted worlds. But funding cuts had destroyed those dreams. The government said there was no money for pure research anymore, no budget for scientists who wanted to study life instead of weapons. So Elena found herself reassigned to Frontier Station Sigma 7, a forgotten outpost scheduled for decommissioning, where her job was to catalog old salvage and wait for a transport ship that would take her back to a desk job on some colony world. She arrived alone, the only human on the station designed for hundreds. The automated systems still worked, mostly, and she had enough food and supplies to last until the transport came in 3 months. It was lonely work, walking through empty corridors and checking inventory lists. But Elena kept herself busy by studying whatever specimens the previous occupants had left behind. On her 12th day aboard the station, she heard something that made her blood run cold. It was a scream, a terrible broken sound that echoed through the metal walls like the cry of a dying animal. Elena froze in the middle of the corridor, her heart pounding, her mind racing through all the possibilities. Pirates who had somehow boarded the station without triggering alarms, perhaps, or a malfunction in the life support system that was causing some horrible noise. She should have sealed herself in the command center and called for help. That was the protocol, the safe choice, the smart thing to do. But Elena had spent her whole life driven by curiosity, by the need to understand things that others feared, and she could not ignore that sound. She followed it through the station, past storage rooms and abandoned quarters, down into the lower levels where the emergency lights barely functioned. The screaming had stopped, but now she could see something else, a faint blue glow coming from one of the cargo bays. Elena approached carefully, her hand on the small plasma pistol she carried for emergencies. She had never fired it at a living creature and hoped she never would. But she was not foolish enough to walk into danger completely unarmed. When she reached the doorway of Cargo Bay 12, she activated her flashlight and swept a beam across the room. What she saw made her gasp. A Vorak, a real living Vorak, lay in a pool of glowing blue blood near the center of the room. Two of its legs were caught in a mechanical trap, the metal teeth buried deep in shattered bone and torn muscle. The creature was massive, bigger than any animal Elena had ever seen in person, with black scales that seemed to absorb the light and 4 eyes that were closed in what looked like unconsciousness. Every protocol in the Galactic Safety Manual screamed at her to run. Vorak were classified as extinction-level threats, creatures so dangerous that entire planets had been evacuated when even one was spotted. The military had standing orders to eliminate them on sight, and any civilian who encountered one was supposed to seal the area and call for immediate armed response. Elena should have done exactly that. She should have backed away slowly, locked the cargo bay, and sent a distress signal that would bring warships racing to her location. In 12 hours, soldiers would arrive and kill the beast, and she would be safe. But she did not move. Instead, she looked at the creature more closely, her scientist mind taking over despite her fear. She saw how thin it was, how its ribs showed through its scales, how its body bore the scars of old wounds that had never healed properly. She saw the trap crushing its legs, the blood still flowing from injuries that would kill it within hours if left untreated. And then the Vorak opened its eyes. 4 amber orbs fixed on Elena, and she felt her breath catch in her throat. She had read about Vara eyes in classified reports. They were supposed to burn with mindless rage, with an endless hunger for violence that could never be satisfied. These eyes were different. These eyes held fear. Elena had spent years studying animals across dozens of worlds, and she knew that look. She had seen it in creatures that had been abused, in specimens that had been mistreated by handlers who cared nothing for their suffering. It was the look of a being that expected pain, expected cruelty, expected nothing from the universe but more hurt. The Vorak tried to rise, tried to bare its teeth in a threat display, but it was too weak. Its remaining legs trembled and collapsed, and it fell back into the pool of its own blood with a whimper that sounded almost like a sob. "Oh," Elena whispered, and she felt something crack inside her chest, the professional distance she was supposed to maintain, the fear that should have kept her safe. "Oh, you poor thing." She put away her pistol. She walked toward the creature slowly, her hands raised to show she held no weapon, her voice soft and gentle. The Vorak watched her approach with those terrified amber eyes, its body tensing as if expecting a blow. "Easy," Elena said, knowing the creature could not understand her words but hoping it might understand her tone. "I am not going to hurt you, I promise. I just want to help." She knelt beside the trap and examined it carefully, ignoring the massive jaws just inches from her head, ignoring the claws that could disembowel her with a single swipe. The mechanism was old but simple, and she found the release lever after a moment of searching. "This is going to hurt," she warned the creature. "But I need to get you free, okay? Just stay calm." She pulled the lever, and the trap released with a grinding screech. The Vorak screamed again, that broken and crackling cry, but it did not attack her. It just lay there, trembling, watching her with eyes that seemed to hold a question it could not ask. Elena looked at the wounded creature, at the blood still flowing from its shattered legs, and made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "Come on," she said softly, placing her hand on its massive head. "Let us get you to the medical bay. I'm going to save you. Do you understand? I am going to save you." The Vorak did not understand her words, but something in her voice reached it anyway. The surgery lasted 14 hours. Elena worked without rest, using every piece of medical equipment the station possessed, adapting techniques designed for humans to a creature whose biology she barely understood. She had studied Vorak anatomy in classified documents years ago, but reading about something and actually operating on it were completely different experiences. The creature's blood was bioluminescent, glowing bright blue whenever it touched air, and Elena had to synthesize more of it using the station's chemical fabricators because the beast had lost so much. Its bones were denser than steel, requiring specialized cutting tools to remove the fragments from its crushed legs. Its hearts, it had two of them, beating in a strange rhythm that Elena had never heard before, kept trying to fail, and she had to restart them 3 times during the procedure. Through all of it, she talked to the creature. She did not know why she did it. The Vorak could not understand her words, could not respond to her voice, could not even stay conscious through most of the surgery. But Elena talked anyway, telling the creature about her life on Earth, about the dog she had grown up with, about her dreams of exploring the galaxy and discovering new forms of life. She talked about her failures and her fears, about the loneliness of this abandoned station, about everything and nothing at all. Perhaps it was for herself as much as for the creature. Perhaps she just needed to hear a human voice in the silence. When the surgery was finally over, Elena collapsed into a chair beside the operating table and stared at her patient. The Vorak was still alive, barely. She had managed to save its 2 remaining good legs, had stopped the bleeding, had done everything she could to give it a chance at survival. Whether it would actually survive was another question entirely. She named him Kale. She did not know that this was close to his actual designation. Did not know that somewhere in the creature's engineered brain, a spark of recognition flickered when she spoke the name. She just thought it sounded right for a creature so fierce yet so broken. The first week was the hardest. Kale drifted in and out of consciousness, his massive body racked with fever as his system fought off infection. Elena stayed by his side almost constantly, monitoring his vital signs, adjusting his medications, feeding him nutrient paste through a tube because he was too weak to eat on his own. She barely slept, barely ate, focused entirely on keeping this impossible patient alive. Sometimes, when the fever was at its worst, Kale would thrash and growl, his claws scraping against the medical bed, his broken war cry echoing through the empty station. In those moments, Elena would place her hand on his head and speak softly, and somehow impossibly he would calm. His 4 amber eyes would find her face, and the rage would fade, replaced by something that looked almost like confusion. Why was this creature not hurting him? Why was she helping him? Kale had never experienced anything like this. His entire existence had been pain and punishment, commands and consequences. The Krithim handlers had taught him that kindness was weakness, that gentleness was a lie, that every creature in the universe wanted only to use him or destroy him. But this human, this small, soft, fragile human kept touching him with hands that did not hurt, kept speaking to him with a voice that held no anger. It made no sense. By the second week, Kale was strong enough to eat on his own. Elena brought him food from the station store's protein blocks designed for humans but nutritious enough for his biology, and watched with amazement as he ate from her hand. His jaws could have bitten her arm off in an instant, but he took the food so gently, so carefully, that she almost laughed. "Good boy," she said, the words coming naturally even though she knew how ridiculous they sounded. This was not a dog from Earth. This was a monster that had been designed to destroy civilizations. But when she scratched behind his ear ridges and he leaned into her touch, it was hard to remember that. By the 3rd week, Kale could walk again. His gait was unsteady, his 2 missing legs throwing off his balance, but he refused to stay on the medical bed any longer. Elena watched him struggle to his feet, watched him take his first shaky steps across the room, and felt tears burn in her eyes. She had done this, she had saved him. Kale looked at her with those 4 amber eyes, and something passed between them that neither could have explained. Then he limped across the room and lay down at her feet, pressing his massive head against her leg. From that moment on, he never left her side. Elena would walk through the station doing her work, and Kale would follow, his uneven footsteps echoing behind her like a shadow made of scales and muscle. She would sit in the command center reading old research files, and he would curl up beside her chair, his eyes always watching, always alert. She would eat her meals in the cafeteria, and he would wait patiently until she offered him a share. Never demanding, never threatening. The galactic scientific community would have said it was impossible. Vorak were engineered to bond only with Krithan handlers through neurochemical implants. They were not capable of forming natural attachments. Their brains had been designed to respond to pain and dominance, not to kindness and care. What Elena was experiencing should not have been able to happen, but humans have always had a strange gift. Thousands of years ago, on a small blue planet called Earth, humans had looked at wolves, vicious predators that could tear them apart, and decided to make friends with them. They had taken wild horses and turned them into partners. They had bonded with elephants and dolphins and countless other creatures that should have been enemies. Humans did not conquer animals through force alone. They conquered them through patience, through gentleness, through an almost magical ability to see past the danger and find a connection underneath. Elena did not try to control Kale. She did not give him commands or punish him for disobedience. She simply cared for him, treated his wounds, spoke to him softly, and let him choose his own path. When he growled at shadows, she did not hit him. She just waited until he calmed. When he refused to eat, she did not force him. She just sat beside him and talked until he was ready. And slowly, incredibly, Kale began to change. The rage that had burned inside him since birth started to fade. The fear that had defined his existence started to heal. In its place, something new was growing, something the Krithan had never imagined there. War beasts could feel love. Kale had found something worth protecting, and he would never let it go. High Commander Thuric stared at the sensor report and felt his scales ripple with disbelief. The defective Vorak on Frontier Station Sigma-7 was still alive. The automated systems had detected its biosignature weeks ago, but that alone would not have concerned him. Wounded Vorak could survive for surprisingly long periods before finally dying. What concerned him was the second biosignature that appeared alongside it. A human. A single human female, living on the same station as a Vorak, and somehow still breathing. The sensors showed them moving together through the corridors, their signatures overlapping as if they were traveling side by side. This should have been impossible. Vorak killed humans on sight, driven by 10,000 years of engineered aggression. Unless something had changed. Thuric understood the implications immediately. If a human had somehow managed to bond with a Vorak without the neural implants, without the chemical conditioning, without any of the tools the Krithan Empire used to control their war beasts, the consequences could be catastrophic. Other species might learn this technique. The Vorak might become weapons that anyone could wield. He could not allow that. He assembled a strike team of 12 of his best soldiers, veterans who had fought in campaigns across a dozen worlds. They armed themselves with plasma rifles and shock grenades, with armor designed to withstand Vorak claws, with every tool of war the Empire could provide. They loaded onto a fast attack ship and raced towards Sigma-7 at maximum speed. Capture the human alive, Thuric ordered through the communication channel. We need to understand how she did this. As for the defect, destroy it. We cannot risk it being studied by our enemies. The soldiers acknowledged his command and prepared for battle. On the station, Elena had no idea that death was racing toward her through the stars. She had settled into a strange but comfortable routine with Kale. Each morning, she would check his healing wounds and feed him breakfast. Each afternoon, they would walk through the station together while she completed her cataloging work. Each evening, they would sit in the observation deck and watch the distant stars. Elena talking softly about nothing in particular, while Kale lay beside her with his head in her lap. She had almost forgotten that the galaxy outside was dangerous. She had almost forgotten that she was living with a creature that the entire civilized universe feared. When she looked at Kale, she did not see a monster anymore, she saw a friend. The attack came at midnight, station time. Elena was sleeping in her quarters when the first explosion rocked the station, throwing her from her bed onto the cold metal floor. Alarms screamed through the corridors, red emergency lights flashing everywhere, and she could hear the distant sound of plasma fire. Kale was on his feet instantly, his four amber eyes blazing with an alertness she had never seen before. His broken war cry ripped through the air, and for the first time since she had met him, Elena felt a flash of fear. This was not the gentle companion she had come to know. This was the creature the Krithan had designed, a living weapon awakening to the threat of battle. "Kale," she said, trying to keep her voice calm. "What is happening?" The answer came seconds later when a section of the wall exploded inward and Krithan soldiers poured into the room. Their armor gleamed in the emergency lights, their weapons raised and ready, their reptilian faces twisted into expressions of cold determination. "Seize the female," one of them shouted. "Kill the defect." 3 soldiers rushed toward Elena with restraint devices in their hands. They were fast, trained for exactly this kind of operation, confident that the wounded and defective Vorak would be no threat. They were wrong. Kale moved faster than anything Elena had ever seen. One moment he was standing beside her bed, and the next he was among the soldiers, his remaining legs driving him forward with impossible speed. His jaws closed around the first soldier's throat before the man could even scream, and he was already spinning toward the second before the body hit the ground. The second soldier managed to raise his weapon, but Kale's claws tore through his armor like paper, sending him crashing into the wall with wounds that would never heal. The third soldier tried to run, but Kale caught him in 2 strides and ended him with a single bite. The remaining 9 soldiers opened fire. Plasma bolts slammed into Kale's body, burning through his scales, filling the air with the smell of scorched flesh. He screamed his broken war cry, that crackling, desperate sound that his handlers had mocked, but he did not fall. He charged through the barrage, ignoring wounds that would have killed a lesser creature, driven by something far more powerful than pain or self-preservation. He was protecting Elena. 2 more soldiers died before they could reload their weapons. Another fell when Kale's tail swept his legs out from under him, and the creature's jaws finished the job. The formation broke as the survivors realized they were facing something they had never encountered before, a Vorak that fought not for commands or conditioning, but for love. Elena pressed herself against the wall, watching in horror and amazement as Kale tore through the strike team. Blue blood poured from dozens of wounds on his body, mixing with the red blood of fallen soldiers on the floor. His movements were slowing as injuries took their toll, but his eyes never lost their fierce determination. "Kale!" Elena screamed as another plasma bolt struck his shoulder. "Stop. Please stop." He heard her voice, not as a command, but as a plea from someone he cared about. His head turned toward her, and for a moment, the rage in his eyes softened. Then he turned back to the remaining soldiers and stood over Elena, his body forming a shield between her and any threat. 5 Krithan were still alive, but none of them moved to attack. They stared at the wounded Vorak, at the bodies of their comrades, at the human woman who somehow stood unharmed behind a creature that should have killed her first. "Fall back," one of them whispered. "Fall back now." They ran. They fled through the breach in the wall and back to their ship, leaving their dead behind, carrying a story that would spread across the Empire like wildfire. They had seen the impossible, a Vorak protecting a human, fighting for something other than orders, choosing loyalty over conditioning. When they were gone, Kale finally collapsed. He fell to the floor in a pool of mixed blood, his breathing ragged, his wounds too numerous to count. Elena rushed to his side and pressed her hands against the worst of the injuries, tears streaming down her face. "Why did you do that?" she sobbed. "Why did you fight for me?" Kale could not answer with words, but he pressed his massive head against her chest, and his 4 amber eyes found her face, and in that moment, the answer was clear. He had finally found something worth dying for. The story of what happened on Frontier Station Sigma-7 spread across the galaxy like a shockwave. The surviving Krithan soldiers reported everything to their superiors, who reported it to High Commander Theric, who tried desperately to keep the information contained. But secrets have a way of escaping, especially secrets this explosive. Within weeks, every intelligence agency in the civilized systems had heard some version of the tale. A lone human scientist, a wounded Vorak, and a bond that should have been impossible. The Galactic Council demanded answers. Ambassador Yeth of the Valorian Republic stood before the assembly and spoke the question that burned in everyone's mind. How did a single human, with no military training and no specialized equipment, accomplish what the Krithan Empire has been trying to prevent for 10,000 years? How did she bond with a creature that was engineered to be unbondable? The Krithan representative stammered through excuses about malfunctions and defective specimens, but no one believed him. The footage from the soldiers' armor cameras had already been leaked, and the whole galaxy had seen Kale standing over Elena, bleeding from a dozen wounds, refusing to let anyone harm her. That was not a malfunction, that was devotion. Elena herself was brought before the council 3 months after the incident, escorted by a security detail that watched Kale with nervous eyes. The Vorak walked beside her with his uneven gait, his scars visible beneath patches of regrown scales, his 4 amber eyes scanning the crowd for any sign of threat. When someone moved too quickly in Alana's direction, a low growl rumbled from his chest, a warning that needed no translation. "Dr. Vasquez," the council president said, "please explain to us how you achieved this remarkable result." Elena looked at the assembled representatives from 100 different worlds, at the cameras that would broadcast her words across the stars, and she spoke simply. "I did not achieve anything," she said. "I just treated him the way my species has been treating animals for thousands of years. I was kind to him. I cared for him. I showed him that not everyone wanted to hurt him. That is all." "But the Vorak are engineered to resist bonding," Ambassador Yeth protested. "Their neural pathways are specifically designed to respond only to Krithan control methods. What you describe should be neurologically impossible." Elena smiled and placed her hand on Kale's scarred head, and the massive predator leaned into her touch like a dog seeking affection. "The Krithan designed the Vorak to respond to pain and dominance," she explained. "They never considered the alternative. They never tried kindness because they could not imagine it working. But my species learned something a long time ago. You do not earn loyalty through cruelty. You earn it through care." She told him about Earth's history, about the wolves that became dogs, about the wild horses that became partners, about the elephants and dolphins and countless other creatures that humans had befriended across the millennia. She explained that humans had never been the strongest or the fastest predators on their world. They had survived by making allies, by finding connection, by looking at dangerous beasts and asking not, "How can I control this?" but "How can I understand this?" The Krithan made a fundamental error, Elena concluded. They assumed that violence was the only language. They did not realize that there are older languages, deeper ones. Patience is a language. Gentleness is a language. Love is a language. And apparently, those languages work on Vorak too. The council chamber erupted in chaos as representatives shouted questions and demands. But Elena was already walking away, Kale limping beside her, the two of them leaving the politicians to argue while they found a quiet place to rest. The consequences of her testimony unfolded over the following decade. The Krithan Empire's War Beast program collapsed within 3 years. Once the secret was out, resistance movements across their territories began implementing what they called the Vasquez Protocol, capturing wounded Vorak instead of killing them, treating their injuries, showing them patience and care. Not all of these attempts succeeded, but enough did that the Empire could no longer trust their own weapons. Vorak began defecting to enemy sides, following handlers who had earned their loyalty rather than commanded it. Entire packs simply walked away from Krithan armies, disappearing into the wilderness of conquered planets, choosing freedom over servitude. The terror that had made the Empire unstoppable was suddenly a liability, and their expansion ground to a halt. Some freed Vorak went feral, unable to adapt to life without purpose, dangerous to anyone who approached them. These were relocated to protected wildlife preserves on uninhabited worlds, where they could live out their lives without hurting anyone. It was not a perfect solution, but it was better than the alternative. Other Vorak, a rare and remarkable few, chose to bond with new companions. Most selected humans, drawn by something in the way these small and fragile creatures offered friendship without demanding submission. A new profession emerged: Vorak rehabilitation specialists, trained in the techniques that Elena had pioneered, helping former war beasts find peace after lifetimes of violence. Elena wrote a book about her experiences, then another, then a dozen more. She became the galaxy's leading expert on xenobiological bonding, consulted by governments and militaries and scientific institutions across known space. She received honors and awards, gave speeches to crowded auditoriums, and was offered positions at the most prestigious universities in existence. She turned them all down. Instead, she returned to a small research station on a quiet world, far from the politics and the fame, where she could continue her work in peace. Kale went with her. Of course, he always went with her. His legs never fully healed, and his war cry remained broken and crackling, but none of that mattered to either of them. Sometimes, in the evenings, they would sit together on the station's observation deck and watch the stars come out. Elena would talk softly about her day, about her research, about nothing in particular, and Kale would rest his massive head in her lap with his 4 amber eyes closed. In those moments, it was easy to forget that he had been bred for destruction. It was easy to forget that the Krithan had considered him defective, had thrown him away like garbage, had left him to die alone in a forgotten corridor. He was not defective anymore. He was not a weapon, not a monster, not a failed experiment. He was simply Kale, a creature who had been given something he never expected, something that had transformed his entire existence. He had been given kindness, and in return, he had given something equally precious. He had given loyalty that would last until his final breath. The galaxy asked how humanity had tamed the untamable, and Elena always gave the same answer. "We did not tame anything," she would say with a smile. "We just asked if it wanted to be loved." That was the human way. That was why the universe would never be the same.